Let me just say this, because I think I might be beginning to frighten you that our kids were traumatized, always being beaten and such. There were only 5 things on which we used the cane. Only 5. These were the big 5. All the other times, we used things like reward and, the denial of reward, the opposite of that. We used things like, pleasure and the denial of pleasure. And so we would say things to a child, who had been defiant and disobedient, and they knew better than to do that. We're all going off to Susan's birthday party, but you cannot come because you're in discipline and you have to stay home. And of course, they would spend that time crying and how mean we were and such, but hopefully the next time they would know there's a party coming up. We're not going to do what we did last time because we want to go. And so it wasn't about caning, which is why I'm saying discipline isn't about caning. Discipline is about setting right what has gone wrong. Caning is one of the things you do, but rarely so. And we can talk about that.
So then they grow. They become 10 to 13, puberty, intense emotions, awareness of their sexuality, and they're curious. And maybe many of you have teenagers, so you know what it's like. So they want to explore, want to investigate. I'm grateful that we're going to do a workshop on social media because that seems to be the new way that they explore a lot. And you may not always know. So it's wonderful when it's in the open so you can process and talk. By the way, as a family, I'm a romantic. So I've saved every love letter was sent when we were courting. And I dried the petals and so on. I'm a romantic. When they turn 13, they're allowed to read my letters. Because they're old enough. I know they're curious. After they read, I tell them, now sit down, let's talk. Because at this stage, one of the things that we want to do is we want to teach them carefully. We want to help them manage their emotions. And we want to help them know enough to want to satisfy their curiosity without them getting into trouble. So talking, teaching becomes very, very important. The other thing we said earlier is how children arrive at certain ages or stages in life, and they don't know what to do themselves, so they look around and they pick the cues that may be the wrong cues. Well, one of the tools we can provide, and I know is provided in this church, is to create a rite of passage that coaches them, speaks to them, directs them towards adulthood in a healthy and mature way. And we could talk a lot about it, but I think you know about a rite of passage that we have a 2-year program called Crossroads, where the children transition and finally become teenagers in the adult church. And the rites of passage have to do with separation, instruction. So in this stage, we want to really keep talking with them. Now, we need to be good friends with them. Friendship begins when they're very young. We begin to establish friendship when they're very young. But at this stage, we want to be able to really say that they are our friends. We want to respect them. We want to honor them. We want to reward them. And we want them to know that we are available and accessible so they can hear us and that we can hear where they're at and be able to speak into their lives. Of course, emotionally, there's a lot of upheaval. One of my daughters, I remember, she just, personalities are so different. This was the most passionate, intense child. And in this stage, I still remember sometimes she'd come to the kitchen and she's crying. And I'd ask, what's happened? She'd say, oh, don't mind me, Mom. It's just the hormones. There wasn't any real reason. It's just that she wasn't managing her emotions because they were so intense and overwhelming. But the fact that she had the freedom to do that, I'm forever grateful.
This stage of, which we're calling stage number 4, the 10 to 13, is the transition years. The child begins to change in this time, 10 to 13, because the boys want to transition into men. And the girls are now starting to have puberty. And sometimes puberty begins in today's, world and diets and etc. Even a girl of 8 years old can begin to have, menstrual cycle periods and etc. But normally it's around this stage. And it can be filled with shame, or you can redeem it so that she recognizes this is just who I am as a woman. But then knowing what she is as a woman, why the boys are different, generates curiosity, a desire to explore, to discover, and the same is true with the boys and such. So you have to manage their transition sexually into an awareness that can lead them down the wrong road if there's nobody to walk with them. For the boys, on the one hand, but for the girls. And the tendency is for it to be filled with a sense of embarrassment because they don't know how to talk about these things. They'll have mistakes if the girls, periods come and it was unexpected and she bloodied her clothes and such. How does she deal with that? What does it mean then to be secretive about the fact that I do have my menstrual cycle? But the boys also begin to have the equivalent male. Boys are sort of delayed in their sexual development than girls are, even in their learning ability. They catch up at about the age of 16 in terms of learning. Girls learn much quicker when they're younger than the boys do. But even in terms of physical development, the boys begin to show, to have wet dreams and those sorts of things a little later than the girls begin their menstrual cycle. And so the boys may not show that initially. But the changes that are taking place inside of them, the development of testosterone is going to mean that they're going to begin to explore what it means to be a man, what it means to take risk, what it means to live with danger, and those sorts of things. One of the indicators that they're there, and you probably went through this, is they keep stabbing their toes on rocks and stones and etc. You remember that? Your big toe was always bleeding. Mine was, because the testosterone made me clumsy. As I walked, I wasn't always, and I didn't know what was happening to my body, but something was happening. And then, that season ended and I was a man, okay? But it's that stage. And that's the indicator that your parenting needs to change. When they hit puberty, your parenting needs to change. In the early years, the first stage of parenting, which were those first 4 stages coming up until this 4th stage, you have authority over your child, and you use authority to get them to do what they need to do. And you tell them, Mommy, you do not do that again. Otherwise, I will discipline you. And they will do what you ask of them. When they transition into their teen years, dare you say that to them, and they'll say, try. Okay? And now they're ready to take you on. With a child under 13, there are seasons where you sit down and you explain why and you help them understand the consequences and etc., etc. But you really cannot reason with them because they cannot understand the full implications of their actions because they're not yet there. They're a young child. And so you may try and explain, this might happen, that might happen, etc., but they don't fully get it. And so you use authority to parent. But once you're into the puberty and teen years, you need to put aside authority as you have used it in the younger years and begin to use influence. There's a difference. Influence is where a child does something for you because they really want to do the right thing for you, because they really want to obey, because they really love you and they want to express that love. If you continue to use authority into the teenage years, it will end badly. And you can't whack a 14-year-old child with a cane, okay? You just can't, because it shames them and it brings up the wrong emotions in them, okay? And they will fight against it. But you use influence. And influence is about relationship. Let me say this. I'll give you an analogy here that I want to stick in your brain, okay? Say, okay, Janet over here doesn't have a lot of money, okay? And even before going to the bank, she has to think about, how much am I going to take out because I don't have a lot in my account. Some of us have mastered the art of floating our accounts above zero, just above zero, okay? There's never any money in it, but we still maintain the account, so etc. But David over here has 3 million shillings in his account. When David writes a check of 500,000 and goes to the bank and gives it to the teller, The teller opens up the account, looks at it, and gives him the money. There is no discussion, there is no talk, there is nothing. He doesn't ask him any questions, he just gives him the money. But when Janet, whose account floats around 300 shillings, writes a check of, 5,000 shillings and goes to the bank, he opens and then he's quiet for a long time and then he does, and then he looks at it and then he's quiet and says, and then he takes a check, he writes something on it and he says, give me a minute. And he goes and sees the manager. Okay? And then he comes up and says, can you wait in the waiting room over there? Somebody will come and talk to you there. There are many issues if you don't have enough in the account to transact the transaction you want. But the guy who has enough, nobody talks to them. This is you as a parent. If in your account with your child, you have enough goodwill and love, and you have deposited a lot of deposit when it comes to tenderness and care and relational, relational capital, and you discipline your child, they don't have an issue. Because you have withdrawn from an account with 5 million, you've withdrawn 500 in that one transaction where you discipline them. But if your account is empty with your child and borders on 0, and you discipline them and withdraw 500, there are many, many issues. And that child will resent you and fight you and be angry towards you because you're now in the red. Your account is in the red. So as you approach these teenage years and the transition from stage 4 to stage 5, one of the most important things you can do is to start depositing into your child's account. Deposit love in abundance. Deposit, relational capital in abundance. Deposit goodwill in abundance. Deposit affirmation in abundance. Deposit all those things that makes this child say, I really like daddy. I really like daddy. He's always cheering me on. He says nice things about me. He really, cheers me on, and etc., etc., etc. Because in the teenage years is where the biggest withdrawals are made. And if your account is empty as you enter the teenage years, you will have an angry child that you're trying to discipline. And then parenting becomes very difficult. But if your account is abundant and rich and filled, you make mistakes, but there's enough deposit of love. You remember what, the passage we read a little earlier was, love one another deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sin. If my account is rich, I can afford to make some financial mistakes and they will not shut me down. But if my account is empty and I make a financial mistake, I'm in debt for a long time to come, and recovery is different. And so as you come to the next stage now, this is now as you go into, the 14 to 19 years, 14 to 19. There are some developmental challenges you're going to face whether you like it or not. And one of them is separation. And it is hardest for mothers with their daughters. Daughters of 15-year-olds don't like their mother. Okay? Quite apart from the fact that they think they have more, they can get their father's attention more than the mother can, and so they start competing with you. They're also trying to wear your shoes, your jewelry, your cologne, your perfume, your dresses when you're not there. Okay? They're trying on your things, and they also have an opinion on how you look when you wear those things, and etc. And mothers of 15-year-olds really struggle. It just seems as though their daughter hates them, and their daughter's always picking a fight with them, and their daughters love their dad. It's almost as though they're competing for their dad's attention with the wife, And so they're always daddy this, and they have their daddy on a finger, wrapped around a finger, and they're always saying nice things to their daddy, and the daddies respond, okay? But the mothers have the worst issues. When that happened to us, I would tell my wife, don't worry. I'm their best friend now. But by the time these girls are 27, 28 years old, I will be forgotten in the rearview mirror, and you will be their hero. And it's true. She became their hero. They would come home and say, oh, mommy, let me make you a cup of tea. Oh, mommy, let me carry a handbag. Oh, mommy. And I'm sitting there. Nobody, hey, hi, I'm here. Nobody was interested in me. They were all mommy, mommy, mommy. Because it switched when they got to about 24 years old. But at 15, it was a battle. Why? Because for the girl child, she's separating from the only other girl she knows, who is her mother. And she wants to distance herself so that she can have her own identity. And her identity is wrapped around the men in her life, and primarily her father. Okay? You remember in the book of Genesis when Adam and Eve sinned. Okay? And God came and judged them. And he judged the man and gave him a punishment on the basis of work. Because of what you have done, you will labor and sweat to bring forth food from the ground. Men's identity is often wrapped around the matter of work and labor. But to the woman he said, you will give pain, you give birth to children in pain, and your desire will be for your man. Okay? And many women define themselves, especially around their children, and around the person who is their loved spouse, okay? And women don't define themselves around work. Maybe the modern woman nowadays does, because we've turned women into men by demanding, that they behave in the corporate world like men, and they argue like men and reason like men and take risk like men, but they're different, okay? And in that sense then, men don't define themselves largely around relationships, but around work. Which is why when you see a man who doesn't have a job, has lost a job, has been sacked or whatever, there is no more devastated image of a man than a man who doesn't have a job and no hope of getting one. But that doesn't trouble women as much. There is no more devastated image of a woman than a woman who has lost a loved child. It tears them to the heart in a way that it doesn't with men. In the same way that a man is torn to the heart, done asunder by the loss of a job and no hope of getting one, okay? So the girls are going to define themselves around a relationship, and it will largely be around the father. The boys are also pushing away from the father, but they're not going to push in the direction of the mother. Now, granted, teenage boys love their mothers, but their identity is going to be wrapped around a male image. And it's going to be that drinking and smoking and risk-taking and womanizing and those sorts of things. Unless those issues were dealt with when they were 6 or 7 years old, okay? And the teenage years are a particular sort of years. You cannot parent with authority, you parent with influence. You have to have won your battles 10 years before you hit the teenage years. In other words, when they're 6 or 7 is when you win that battle before they're 15. And at the same time, too, when it comes to parenting, you must have huge capital in your account so that you can withdraw, because the kids will withdraw, you will withdraw and you discipline, and if you don't have enough, it's going to end up in being, a difficult relationship with your child where you're always fighting, shouting at one another. They won't listen to you. They don't want to, be in your presence, and et cetera, et cetera. They're differentiating. It withdraws big time from the account unless you just keep depositing and depositing and depositing relational capital, affirmation, love, voicing it, cheering them on, believing in them, respecting them, and everything else. That then means that when you deposit, it's not a crisis for them.
And then stage 6 is about young adulthood. But if you listen, there are things that we keep repeating ourselves, and it's inevitable because presence, affirmation, all those things are important at any stage of development. But now they become young adults, and I guess this is a season, the significant season that we have been in. And they are trying to be themselves. They want a measure of independence, and they need the space to find themselves. But they still need to be guided and cared for. And we found out we need to give the gift of trust. Somehow we need to affirm them. We need to draw from the resources of what we've taught them before and say, we believe you can make this decision now. And to do it diplomatically and wisely so that we don't take the power for them to make decisions, but we also don't leave them to drown. We want to affirm their efforts to do the right thing, to make decisions, because we want them to grow in confidence. So we need to give the gift of trust. And we've talked this through as a couple, determined what to do as a couple for each child, because remember, they're all unique and different. But by and large, they need the gift of trust from us. And they need us to celebrate their wins and to be able to grieve with them or to support them in their losses. They won't always do it right, but they need to know we'll be there for them. And even as we encourage them to be independent, we need to encourage them to grow in being finishers. They'll still experience consequences of choices they make because we step back more from bailing them out. But we encourage them to be finishers. Whatever that means, if there's a task that was given to them, either entrusted with a responsibility, we want to help them finish what they began. We want to help them own their faith. They can no longer ride on our faith. And we need to, if we had connected them early enough to the community of God's people, if we had supported them early enough in their commitment to ministry, it may be easier. But let me say this very clearly. It doesn't matter what stage of development, they need to see authentic faith from us. They need to see, whether they're little or older, they need to see that our faith is authentic. At this stage, maybe it's easier to have more difficult conversations. They are older. They can understand the inconsistencies of adulthood. But they are nevertheless impacted by us if we are not authentic. We began by saying no perfect parents. We can also say no perfect Christian, but they need to see us fighting the good fight. And we need to affirm their own journey of such. We talked about a vision for the future. I think this becomes very important at this stage. What are they about? How do we help them connect with their gifts and passion? How do we support them? Because that is an important thing for them. They're beginning to discover who they are, and we can enable them. As we say this, remember the most beautiful reality is this. God has a clear, precise, and detailed vision for their lives. 1 Corinthians 2:9 is another of my favorites that says, no ear has heard, no eye has seen, no mind has conceived what God has planned for those who love him. So helping them connect with even what God may want for them, that needs to be a part of what we give to them or how we support them or help them in this stage of early adulthood. We need to have launched, we the Murius feel very strongly that people need to be launched early in life. But I think there's a phenomenon where children stay much longer in the home now, and we support them a lot, but we need to successfully launch them from home. But to do this, we needed to have begun a little earlier so that they're prepared for it. But no matter at what point we begin, we need to have conversation, help them anticipate that the moment is coming when they will leave home. And we need to set the times and determine the terms for leaving. And we could tell you all our fun stories because we have done this 3 times. We need to help them be prepared so that they can survive alone. But to do that, we needed to have begun training from the time they were very young so that there's compounded understanding and capacity and self-confidence by the time they are in their early adulthood. And we did several things. We tried to create a gap year for them so that they could do certain things after high school. We created gap year experiences, before high school. We'd give them a break. We created a gap year experience after high school. And all this was guided and directed, but we're trying to help them grow in responsibility. So by the time they reach this final stage, we say, well, you've done this before. You've done certain things before. You're going to do this and you're going to succeed. We want to affirm the next stage. And then we need to construct a rite of passage that makes it natural. Just because every significant stage has a rite of passage, we want to construct a rite of passage for them to transition from home. and we make it a family affair so that they are ready. And we could talk about that at another moment.
One last thing, and then we'll, I said that there are 4 things we wanted to pass on to you. Okay, so one last thing, and then we'll turn that to questions and answers. You have 7 tools that will help you in your parenting, okay? And I need you to get them down, because when push comes to shove, these are the 7 things that will help you parent well. I'll go through this very quickly because it's self-explanatory. Number 1 is pray, 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 pray for your child. And what I mean by that is God is on your side. Go to him and pray qualities, pray discipline, pray traits that you need your child to let go of. Pray, for their understanding. Pray for their future. Pray, 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 pray for your child on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. Prayer is a tool, and God hears your prayers. We could tell you story upon story of how God has answered prayer for our children, and it wasn't them, and it wasn't our parenting, it was the mercy of God. Mm-hmm. So pray for your child, and just pray over and over and over and over again. Make it your business every day to mention your child in the presence of God. That's the first one.
And pray with them as much as you can too.
Number 2 is affirm, 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 affirm your child. The smallest traits. Mommy, you walk so nicely. Oh, mommy, you look pretty. Oh, mommy, your hair is so lovely. Oh, mommy, you're so well behaved. Just keep affirming them. They can never get enough of that, because the world around them is in the business of showing them that they are a failure, they will never amount to anything, they will never do good enough, etc., etc. That's the educational system. I ask this question. When you spell yellow, okay, Y-E-L-L-O-W, that's yellow, okay, the color yellow, okay? Why is it that if I spell it Y-E-L-O-W, it's marked wrong, 0? And yet I got, 5/6 of it right. It's still 0, okay? The world is in the business of reinforcing to you, unless you're perfect, you're not good enough. And you know it, the educational system, the numbering of children in class, what number are you in class this term? Or it just beats everybody down. And there's not enough people lifting us up and celebrating our gifting and celebrating our uniqueness and celebrating our enablement. There are not enough people doing that. You, as a parent, need to be the cheerleader to help your child believe in themselves when the world is trying to tell them you'll never amount to anything. And so affirm them every way that you can. Number 3 is love on them and love on them and love on them in little ways, in big ways. I bought this apple for you. Oh, I want to take you to see something I saw because I just really love spending time with you. Just love on them and love on them and love on them. They will soak it in like a sponge. And there is never enough of that. Remember in this way that you're depositing into the account, into your parenting account. And so just love on them and love on them and love on them. Number 4 is presence, 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 presence. Let me say this, and you can throw the rotten tomatoes and rotten eggs after this, okay? I think one of the challenges of modernity is this. Do I work, particularly as a mother, do I work or do I stay home with my child? In an ideal world, my counsel would be stay home with your child. You can almost tell the difference between a child who has been parented by a present mother especially, because mothers are good in these early years of nurturing. Men are hopeless when it comes to nurturing. But they have their place. And we used to say this with my wife. You look after them now. I'll take them on when they're teenagers. They're mine when they're teenagers. Now, of course, times change. And that may be more cultural than it is, psychology. But nevertheless, mothers are nurturers. How I wish, if it were an ideal world, that you could be home with your children. And when somebody puts you down and says, what do you do for a living? What's your career? And you say, oh, I'm looking after my children at home. I'm a homemaker. Never let anybody shame you for saying that. It is an honorable responsibility to be able to bring your children up yourself. No house help, no teacher can do that for you. And when children are busy parents, high-flying all over the world and never present at home, it will appear, particularly in the identity years of the teenage. I wish it were possible that you could be present. So every time you have a chance to be, just be present with your kid and spend tons of time with them, because it will all come back as a blessing. So that's a fourth one. There are three more that I'll let my wife share with you, okay?
Okay. Boundaries. Children, well, I should say boundaries. We're echoing. And the word is clear. The need for consistencies in how we set boundaries. And for just boundaries. I don't know what else to say.
God forbid that you have one permissive parent and one curly parent, and they're always at war with each other.
Yeah.
We used to play that game with my parents. We want to go and see a movie, and we'd ask, Mom, can we go and see a movie? And Mom knew, no, you're not going to see a movie. And then we'd wait for Dad to come for lunch, and we'd say, Daddy, you want to go and see a movie? Can we go? We don't tell him we've asked Mom, and she said no. But because he doesn't know, he said, oh, yeah, you can go and see a movie if you want. So we'll go and see the movie and come back, and then Mom would ask me, I told you not to go. How come you went? Daddy told us we can go. We used to play one another, but you have to be on the same page on this one.
And by the way, that was
boundaries.
Yes, that was one of our big fights. When our children were small, if they played us, they got a chapa.
Yeah,
yes,
one of
because
the big
they are
five for
very
which they got
good
the cane.
psychologists, children. Yes, they are. And then the need to train in character. And we talked about Proverbs 22:6 earlier. Train a child. The word is train. Train has to do with repetition. Training even has space for error. But then there's correction. Training is a process. And there is repetition. And you stay with it. So we need to train our children in character. And we try to do that in so many different ways with our children. If you want them to have the quality of kindness, what will you do as a family? Whatever the value, but training and training and training. And then the thought, finally, the need to instill faith so that they can own their faith. And you have to be deliberate. Children first copy before they can rationalize and justify. So they may not always fully understand, but they will imitate. So just to plead that we don't also tell them how to be good Christians, but that they can see our effort to walk with God. When I was young, my parents used to say, good children go to church, but they always sent us. I can't remember going with them. They would send us to church. The whole idea of instilling faith, but more than anything else, by modeling it. That's what Deuteronomy 9 is about, where it says, love God passionately, and then use the everyday opportunities of life to live out that faith with your children. Talk it with them as they walk, as they sleep, a natural, real part of everyday life.
Let me give you two others and make it up to 10, okay? Community. Who is your community? It takes a village to raise up a child. What is the village that you have surrounded your child with? Is it that uncle who drinks and that, cousin who's doing drugs and that licentious, daughter in that family and etc.? Because if that's their community, that community will teach them to do those things. Okay? Does your community include, Sylvester Stallone and Denzel Washington and Ariel in The Little Mermaid and etc.? Because that community visits you through the TV and the child is learning from that community. Okay? Who is a community who surrounds your children? There were places we did not allow our children to go and spend a night or even spend a long time. And if we had to let them go, we went with them. So we were the party spoilers because we went to Susan's party and we just sat there the whole time, bored, but we're not going to let our child into Susan's house because they bounce off the walls in that house, and there is no discipline, and there is no adult attending, and the kids do whatever they want to do. And so we'd either accompany them or we would not let them go. We were very particular about community. We had about 6 or 7 families where the children could go to sleepover anytime they wanted. But it was families that we knew have the same values, are seeking to teach them the same things, same character that we're working and fighting to teach our children at home. So to lend them over for a weekend to somebody who is doing the same thing, the kids will enjoy the relationship with their age mates, but you know the parents are as intentional in their parenting as we are intentional in ours. We're very particular. We did not own a TV. For the first, I think it was almost 14 years of our marriage or something. And finally, my mother, who had been trying to give us a TV for every Christmas, can I buy you a TV? And we'd say, no, we don't want a TV. Finally, she decided just to bring one. And so we took it, okay, because she brought it. But then we never bought an aerial. Instead, we bought a video machine. And now we chose what they watched. And we watched before we let the children watch, even the cartoons. Because we don't want Ariel in The Little Mermaid to be teaching our children defiance against the father as Ariel shows defiance. And in those Walt Disney movies, many times the kids prove to be more clever than the adults. That's not what we want our children to learn. And so we bought a video machine and would always preview the video before we allowed our children to watch. Okay? And so community, do not let that go. And then finally, love in the sense of, if you really want to show your child love, one of the best ways to show your child love is to show love to your spouse. It has a powerful impact on the children. They do not so much understand the concept of love, even as the Bible defines it, that love is first and foremost a behavior than it is a feeling, okay? They don't understand that yet until they see it in the parents. And a father's love for his wife has a powerful impact in displaying and helping define love for a child. The security that a mother feels in her husband's love helps the children feel safe. And when there is tension and conflict in the home, it is translated directly into the lives of the children. And to bring up good children, the relationship, the quality of the relationship that the father and the mother have is probably the most powerful way of displaying love to that child. Telling the child, I love you, is words. They don't really have meaning until they can see the love between the two. For those of you who are married, between the father and the mother. And so love your children, but now in the sense of loving your spouse, because it translates into the children themselves. Okay, those are 10 currencies you have that you can, in abundance, pour on the kids and fill up your accounts as parents so that you are able to withdraw and it's okay. Now, I think we have half an hour left, and so we really do need to allow questions and answers. Now, we'll probably confused you completely, and it's amazing that our kids turned out okay, and you're wondering what, but let's open up the floor. You probably need clarification on some of these things.